Welcome to Menopause, Marriage and Motherhood, a podcast that's all about changing the way we view midlife and bringing the conversation about menopause out into the open. Each week we share stories, experiences and inspiration. We talk to experts on how to best navigate this time of life and find out how other people have not only survived but thrived through this time. I'm your host, Karen O'Connor.
Hello and welcome. I'm here today again with Ryan. Hey, welcome, Ryan.
Hi. Thank you.
There's a couple of topics that I thought we could talk about today. So it's my turn to come up with the topics. One of them is I had a fabulous conversation with a psychologist, and the podcast came out last week and the week before. It was only supposed to be one podcast, but yeah. Me and psychologists love talking to psychologists and like getting really deeply into a topic, so we just carried on talking. But one of the things that came up during that recording, and I actually deleted it because I kind of realised I was going off track, was his thing is all about communication in relationships and looking at your relationships from the space of what patterns am I bringing from my past into the future. So is it the way my mother was? Is it the way my father was? Did I come from an abusive home? And am I creating that in relationships? And then he talks about, as we went on in the conversation, in the second half of the conversation, he started explaining that when you come from a space of love, everything changes. So I said, being me, I took everything, we were in the middle of the conversation, it wasn't quite as blunt as this, but I went 10 steps to one side and said, so we've just had an election over here. And one thing I noticed in the election was that there was there was no generosity in it regarding anybody else. There was no kindness. It was all about putting other people down. And the further right-wing the party was, the more they put everybody else down. There was no positives in that campaign. It was just negatives. We haven't got this. They're not doing that. They've done this. It was all putting down. It was not coming from a space of care and responsibility and kindness and love. So I posited, do the people who are further right-wing the ones who live in fear? Does right-wing politics come from a space of fear? Are those politicians fear-based? And you know who I'm talking about here. Like, if you're not in Australia, you haven't got a clue what I'm talking about, but just picture it. You know, the far right-wing politicians, it's all me, and you're wrong, and you need to just sort yourself out because you made a mess of things.
That's fun. I didn't expect this to go from psychology to politics so quickly, but
it's not really politics. It's kind of it's the psychology behind the politics. Yeah, because I noticed where I was coming from. When I'm in those kind of conversations, as you know, Ryan, because we have these kind of conversations all the time, and my mind goes off to just in a random direction as it makes all these connections. And I made the connections, like if I look back over my life, the times where I've been depressed or felt lonely or isolated or whatever, there was a lot going on in my life, were the times when I leaned personally more towards the right wing. Yeah. I'm confident in myself and I'm enjoying my life. Look at that. We go all left-wing and community-minded.
Yeah.
That was one of the steps that made me contemplate that possibility.
I think that's a good perspective to have, not necessarily the perspective itself, but the questioning of it, politically speaking. And then this is in records going back to ancient Greece. This is 3,000 years old. Politicians who want to keep things the way they are will always appeal in their political base to two emotions, fear and anger, fight or flight, otherwise known as, interestingly enough, because we are, on a very basic level, animals. And when we feel those two emotions. We want to find a dark, warm, soft place and curl up there and not see the outside world. When we feel confident, you're right, is when we are at our most, I would say, human. We feel the emotions that complete us as individuals, which is, that wanderlust, that confidence, that joie de vivre. So I think there are. I went to an election party on the night with a couple of friends to watch the results come in, and as someone who votes based on policies and not based on people, it gave me some very interesting perspectives. A lot of the perspectives were based on that there are a lot of political candidates around who are apparently involved in a lot of embezzling issues that I had no idea about. But a friend of mine, James, you know him, he knows quite a lot about all of this. And he was like, he's, got this deal going on with this particular foreign government. This guy's got this deal going on with this large corporation. This person's got, and I was like, that's hugely problematic. That's very problematic, especially because, I'm not switched off from the news and from the information coming in. Why isn't this information, coming down to me? Then again, I do tend to only look at when a party says this is what they want. But you're right. I went into it looking at what the policies were and the policies of the parties that were more right-wing. And, everything from pretty much most parties are right-wing at the moment, but we'll go like the far end. For in Australia, for the audience listening, that's it's One Nation and the United Australia Party, I think, are the most right-wing parties we have at the moment. Well, there's others.
The mainstream ones, yeah.
those are the big, very right-wing parties.
There's a few other dodgy ones, but they're not really big enough to make a dent on the map.
Yeah. And so one of the splashes that's come out of this election, I don't know if you personally have heard about it, is that we, as a nation, quite a lot of us got text messages from some of the parties in question. And it was hugely problematic because they were filled with, and I'm not saying this lightly, lies. So much so that the government is now saying they're going to put legislation in place to monitor and police parties who tell lies leading up to the election. One of the examples was something that a friend of mine got. She works as a nurse, and she got a text message saying that the World Health Organization is like coming in and trying to take over the Australian healthcare system, which is just not only wrong, but a very bizarre thing to say. Oh, that's a weird one. So that's very interesting. The thoughts that I had on those things are on being the attacking versus the kind of the openness and stuff. Honestly, my view is a little bit more cynical, but it comes from my experience, not only, in philosophy, but also as a performer. And I've spoken to Jamie, my brother, about this, who is very deeply involved in politics. And he is shocked and appalled and sort of grotesquely intrigued by my suggestion, which is that I'm quite disappointed in the politicians. I'm extremely disappointed, in fact, because, and this isn't a power that I want them to have. Don't get me wrong. I don't want them to have this power, but I am disappointed that none of them have looked into this. They're not using propaganda right. They're not. I made a study of it for psychology and for theatre, and they're using like a little bit of it. They've gotten like broad strokes, maybe, and then kind of been like, yeah, propaganda means we're going to do a smear campaign against our opponent. We're going to, get this fear thing going. And I'm like, that's the tip of the iceberg. That's one part of the balanced meal that is manipulating your audience into thinking what you want them to think, which is shockingly easy if you know what you're doing. And they don't. They don't know what they're doing. I can't believe that none of them, not one of them, has, and not even the major parties, because let's be honest, the major two parties haven't done it either, which also shocks me. No one since like the 80s has used propaganda in Australia, like effectively, So I'm like, I don't want them to be able to do that. That's a bad power for them to have. But I'm a little bit disappointed in them. Do you know what I mean?
I do, yeah. I know. So who was it in the 80s? Paul Keating?
Paul Keating was quite good at it.
Master manipulator, Paul Keating.
He was quite good. It's arguable how much of it was propaganda, and that's why it's good. That's why it's good. You always want several layers of propaganda. You want something, on the top, very obvious. People say, yeah, that's propaganda. But on the other hand, there's another layer underneath. It's a little bit more subtle. And then ideally you have another layer. So you want several layers.
Yeah, that's the point, isn't it? There's no subtlety to what's happened. It's very superficial. It's almost like doing a slapstick comedy as opposed to doing, what's the word I'm looking for? Political commentary.
Political satire tends to be that, yeah.
Satire. It's that difference, isn't it? It's almost insulting because they're treating us like we don't know what's going on in a way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And the problem is that it's the old law of predator and prey. The lazier the prey, the lazier the predator, generally speaking. And we as a country, and I think as a population in the world, honestly, there's so much information coming at us all at once. Most of us tend to vote the way our parents voted, or the way our friends vote, or we're based on a single news article that we've seen. We don't tend to think about that kind of thing, about what the policies are, how it's going to impact us, whether we want it to impact us, versus impacting, the less fortunate or, the more fortunate. Or, for instance, I loved the Greens pamphlets this election because it had, and you read a lot of them and they have, this is what we want to do, but they very rarely have details. Like a lot of them said more liberty. What does that mean? I don't know.
Look at the United Australian parties, all of those billboards that you saw everywhere. Freedom, freedom, freedom.
In what way? Be more specific, please.
Yeah.
Whereas I loved the Greens ones because they did have details, and then down the bottom they had, how are we paying for this? We'll tax the rich. And I was like, that's fun. They've told me where the money's coming from. Whether or not I agree with that is, beside the point. That was the closest we got to propaganda in this election, I think, because it was not only something that people would latch onto, it was mildly funny. That break in tone from, this is the kind of numbers we're looking at for budgeting. This is what, blah, 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 blah. And then at the end, how are we going to pay for this? We're going to tax the rich. That'll be fun. We'll do that. Yeah, because propaganda and any good public speaker will know that you can be lazy. You can appeal to people's fear and people's anger, the two strongest emotions. Because contentment, wanderlust, those kinds of things, they're less tangible and they're more individual. You can't control those emotions. You can control fear and anger. So you can do that. But good propaganda takes those two emotions and then moves on with them. It builds a dream of an easier place to live, a better place to live, instead of just saying, you'll be safe when we raise, the house loan rates or whatever they're all promising. There's a bunch of promises. Most of them don't make sense. It's fine. Yeah, that's just election stuff. I'm a bit disappointed. As someone who does read all this stuff, and it must work for the majority. The majority mustn't care about these things.
I think I was reading an article the other day. I was doing my research for the Speak Up Podcasting Academy, just to put a plug in there. But what they were saying, because I was looking at intros and outros, and Microsoft did a survey. Well, the last one I could get hold of was 2015, the data for 2015, and about how long people will look at something on the internet before they move on. If this is how long you've got to get somebody's attention, then they'll move on. They also did a survey in 2010 or 2012. So back in 2012, it was, you had 12 seconds or 18 seconds or something like that. By 2015, that had dropped to less than 10 seconds. So you've got 10 seconds to grasp everybody. And now that's only just going to carry on going downhill. That was 7 years ago now. So how long do you actually, and I might have got those figures completely wrong, but it is something like that. How long do you actually have to grab somebody's attention? And that's why the likes of the United Australian Party, where all of their billboards were just 3 words, the same word repeated 3 times: freedom, freedom, freedom. Because, hello, I'm going to grab your attention and I'm going to repeat it to make sure you got the message.
Yeah, that's a problem. I guess it's like, you could say it's a problem, but it's not really a problem. People will say it's a problem because they want to go back to the old days when we used to spend more time looking at fewer things. But the fact of the matter is, it's not a problem. It's just the way things are now. We can either, move with the times or we can't. Which is why I'm so disappointed that politicians still make 10-minute long speeches about the things that they want. Where are the really clever ad campaigns on Facebook or Instagram? Where are the memes? If you want to reach an audience now, you want memes. Where is... Yeah. One of the things that I've been irritating Jamie with recently in our current discussions, and he's horrified and fascinated by this concept, is I said, in order to get the most political power, what I would do if I were in charge of the country is install a jester in Parliament, because people don't care what happens in Parliament. And politicians will do anything to get people's attention. But if you've got someone whose job it is to be funny in Parliament, not only are they not going to be able to do anything sillier than a fool is who's been employed to do that kind of stuff, but also people will have a reason to pay attention to Parliament, which is just kind of fun. And especially if you tie the jester into like big journalism stuff like BuzzFeed, so he can be like, he's got his little stick, his little jester head on it, and he can go around and bot people and be like, you're involved with this major corporation, you're embezzling funds from over here, blah, blah. That would be a lot of fun. But because no one's appealing to an audience that has that attention span, that short attention span. I mean, quite apart from all the other problems in our democracy, Jo, my partner, is very disappointed because she grew up in doing the mock UN kind of political stuff, because her family's always been involved in that kind of stuff. And she was groomed thoroughly through all of the different kind of, this is the format of how you give a speech. This is how you've got to speak when you're in Parliament. This is how, you've got to wait your turn. You've got to be polite. You've got to do all this kind of stuff. And no one does it in Parliament. They're all rude to each other. They all speak out of turn. They all interrupt. It's terrible. Jo is disgusted by it. She's got a lot of opinions. But it's just lazy. And it refuses to adapt to the times, I think.
That was the other thing that really hit me, is that more and more over the last few years, you realise just how out of touch those people, those MPs and senators are. So I was reading an article the other day, really surprisingly, in Brisbane, they got 3 Greens votes, three Greens senators got in. And there was an article on MPs. There was an article on one of them, and he's like, I've had to quit my job. I've got another 3 sessions to do before I can go down to Parliament.
I love it.
And a job earning less than, I think it was 60,000 a year or something, and now he's become an MP and his annual salary is 200,000, and he's just like, this is an obscene amount of money. So it's really interesting that somebody's going to get that perspective, because that was the other thing that came up in this Parliament when I was looking at the surveys, is compared to 10 or 15 years ago, these are career politicians. The proportion of MPs who've come up through the party ranks, so they've been some kind of civil servant beforehand, before they've stood for MPs, whereas before you got people like the Greens guy, your local carpenter or your local solicitor or whoever standing as MP. You don't get that as much anymore.
No, I don't think that's entirely their fault. I think we as a society have become more specialized. Mm-hmm. People in their lives become one thing. There's less kind of moving from career to career. We are required to have a lot more certification in order to do stuff now as well, which really makes that difficult. Yeah, you do get career politicians. I mean, I personally think that the amount of money they pay politicians is an incentive to be lazy. You know what I mean? I mean, I've read studies about income to happiness ratios. And apparently it kind of, once you get to about 100 grand a year, your happiness, generally speaking, that's your peak. And after that, you start getting worried because your problems just get bigger the more money you've got. Well, they scale up with the money, apparently. But they did studies on it in America, which I find very, very interesting. So I find it very, very interesting that the pay for a politician is 200 grand. You know, when you could just as easily provide them with, you know, a house and a car, both of which, you know, don't cost a small amount of money, and then give them, you know, a smaller wage and just allow them to focus on the job. But, you know, I think especially because there's a lot of pensions as well. You know, once they've got the job, you've got a pension, you've got a great pay, you've got a lot of benefits. You know, you're never going to be left out in the cold. So for a lot of them, that's the end. They've achieved their goal. They are set for life. Why bother keeping trying? You know, I find that very interesting.
That is really interesting. Going back to what I started with, and
sorry,
no, it's okay. No, it's good because it just went off in a random direction, like our conversations always do. But I just want to bring up the second thing because it's kind of tied in with the first, and that was, you know, the more right wing the party, the more
it appeals to that fight or flight response.
Yeah, I'm just trying to work out how to phrase this because, okay, let me put a context onto this, right? So I have my video editor, gorgeous guy, absolutely wonderful guy, is Pakistani strict Muslim, right? I get on really well with him. We have a laugh and a joke. We exchange messages all the time. If I met him in the street, would I react the same to him as I have over the internet? Absolutely not. Because it's that impression. For me personally, it's not so much about a racism, as in I'm against that. I don't know how to respond to somebody and I don't know what to expect from them. So there's a fear and a holding back, but it's not out of, I don't like them. It's out of, I don't want to make a fool of myself. I don't want to offend anybody. I don't want anybody to get angry with me. And, you know, I just want to be nice and I want to be liked, basically. So I'd respond in a different way to him. And how much of that, so there's kind of two sides to this here. So that comes out of fear. And then, I don't know where I'm going with this. It's something to do with that inherent racism or discrimination. How much of that comes out of fear and how much of it comes out of ignorance? And it was an observation more than anything. I don't know what the question is.
No, it's something that touches on kind of several aspects of both psychology and philosophy. The first is a question that I ask myself quite often, which is about dogs, actually. You know, when you're walking on the street, you're having a good time, you're going to the shops or whatever, and you pass a dog in the street. I don't know about you, but I'm like, oh, a dog. Hello, friend. I want to meet you. Come and love me. And, you know, but you've got to play it cool. You've got to play it cool. You know, and then you're walking along and they pass you and you do like a really kind of sneaky, like, you know, you hold your hand out and they sniff your hand and then you get a little boop from the nose. And you're like, yes. A lot of people are like that with dogs, I find. Probably most people. Everyone likes dogs and dogs are always happy to see you. So my question is, you know, if everyone was always happy to see everyone else, would we be the same with people? That's something I think about a lot. Probably too much, but it comes up to me a lot. The other thing is, like, psychologically speaking, in order to flourish as an individual in the wilderness, and particularly as a small community, you need to have the concept of what your community is and what you're protecting it from. And this relates back to a lot of other instincts which aren't very useful now. But you need to have a very strong us versus them. And this isn't necessarily applicable to humans. Like once upon a time, you would have like, a small village of 100, and the them would be winter or wolves or bears, other things that would come in. It wouldn't necessarily be people, but it could be people, because if you have something and they want something and you're used to fighting, it's now the knee-jerk response, then you will fight because you're afraid that the other one fights. Jamie has some very, very interesting political opinions about how this affects much, much wider kind of populations in terms of war, because it's his belief that war begins because both are afraid of war, not because both want war. But because if you're going to have a war, and if you become more and more afraid of it, then you become more and more keen to control the outcome of that war, which means that you have to start it. It has to be on your terms, which makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know about every time, and I think it's the same on smaller scales. That fear of putting yourself out there impacts on how you affect other people, which means that you're slightly more unfriendly to them, which means that they think that you're unfriendly. So they change how they are. And the gap widens because everyone's afraid, not of everyone else, but because of the possibility of everyone else. And I think that is something that the politicians take advantage of. It is the fear, not of the unknown, but of the known. This is what happened last time. Take dogs. A dog bit you 3 years ago. This dog could also bite you. It's a possibility. It's coming closer. It's you put your hand out. Its muzzle is coming towards you. It would be very easy to just chomp. And if you're walking along the street, you could say, hello, how are you? And they could say, hello, how are you? Or they could say, in my culture, we say, salam. And how disrespectful of you not to do that, which is just frankly a ridiculous thing to say. And I'm not suggesting that anyone would say that. It's just an example. But I get where you're coming from. It saddens me that the leaders of countries across the world don't embrace the idea of throwing off the shackles of fear and saying, this is the country we could live in which we don't have to be afraid. And instead say, we are afraid, you should be afraid, and this is what we should do to fix that fear. It's not focusing on the fear itself. It's focusing on the cause of fear. But fear is always going to be there. We're always going to be afraid of something. We always have been. I'm afraid of the weather. It's 6 degrees out there. Nothing I can do about that. I don't want to go outside. That's fine. But they're always like, you're going to pass people in the street that are going to be grumpy, basically. There are always going to be outliers or any bell curve. And I would personally suggest adopting a way of living that is okay with not just not being afraid, but occasionally getting hurt.
I think one of the things or one of the reasons that made me think about this was I was talking to a friend a while ago, actually interviewed her for the podcast, and she's gay and she's in a same-sex marriage and everything. And I made the comment that I'm not discriminated against it. She said, no, you're not consciously, but subconsciously you don't know how to respond, which causes a discrimination. She said, so they've got a little girl, they go to the school functions, she said, and all the mums and all the parents are sitting there in their groups that they know each other. She said, which group do we sit with? Because we're not automatically invited into a group because they don't know how to deal with us. They don't know where we fit in. And it's that unconscious discrimination, that unconscious bias against people. Because what we see, let's talk about Saad again, what we see is Muslim militants. There's not was militant, you know. So that's what we see, because that's the fear in the back of our mind, isn't it?
Yeah. I get where those fears come from, you know, and it's difficult not to see those things because we are exposed to so much information. And the information that we're exposed to is generally, you know, chosen because it's exciting. And the exciting things are generally violence and war.
Fear-based things. They're fear-based things, yeah.
Fear-based things, yeah. I mean, it also doesn't help that most of the largest newspapers in you know, English-speaking countries are owned by, you know, the one man, the one white man who has many opinions about things he should not have opinions in. But, you know, that's another topic.
But he's welcome to his opinions. He should not be allowed to enforce them on everybody else, which since he owns something like 90% of the newspapers and media outlets in Australia, he's got a stranglehold on what we hear and are presented with.
Mm-hmm. He's extremely problematic as a person and as a representative of the human race. So when you're talking about those preconceptions, because it would be, I think, incorrect to say that it's a sexism or a racism thing, because you're not taking any action to actively, you know, exclude them or hate. It's just no affirmative, no positive affirmation there. So I would say that it is less of a racism thing and more of a kind of hesitation. So what's your question about that? Where does that come into the political thing?
Oh, it's just more about, okay, so how it comes into the political thing is like, I recognize my fear as being a lack of knowledge. That's what I don't know how I'm going to react. I don't know how to react. I don't want to cause offense. I don't want to make a fool of myself, and I don't want to upset anybody. But if you don't recognize that that's what's going on, and that's all that's going on, a very human thing, then it becomes ingrained, and we get the United Australia Party, freedom thing, which is all about, not even them, One Nation, which is all about, let's lock every fear out of the country. That's a better example. Mm-hmm. We'll lock everything that we're afraid of out of the country so that we can absolutely guarantee with total certainty who we're going to be talking to as we're walking down the street.
I figured out what it is. Oh,
great.
Okay, that viewpoint. So the two kind of the differences between the idea that we're going to keep everything the way things are, we're going to shut everything out, you know, we're going to stay the same way, blah, 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 versus we want to work towards this kind of goal, we're going to open the borders, we're going to do all these kinds of stuff. You don't have to change in the conservative side, whereas you do have to change.
Oh, yeah.
On the other side. And that does appeal to a very, very basic fear of change. We are afraid of change, like statistically.
We want certainty. We just want predictability. We want to know what tomorrow is going to bring, what today is going to bring. We need to know that to feel safe.
And I can see why, because, you know, psychologically, in order to not be afraid of of any change, you need to be certain of a few basic things. You need to be certain in your basic needs, basically, like the top stuff, the like less tangible needs, which is things like exploration, creativity, that kind of stuff. We can make those. Those are fine. We're not really concerned about those. But the things that, you know, you need heat, you need water, you need food, you need shelter. Those 4 basic things. And you need a future. Those 5 basic things you need to have in order to not revert to that fear of change as a human, as an animal. Which is why I think the politicians are getting so lazy. I don't know if you saw, but when on election night, when we were watching all the interviews, they came up with a poll of what people were most concerned about during this election. By far the largest was climate change, which was about 32%, I believe. The next largest was affordability of living. the cost of living, which was about 27% of the population, which is honestly a little concerning for me. Is 27% of the population's biggest concern is that they're not going to be able to afford to live. I think is a huge problem. That's a massive issue, and it will impact on how they vote about their future. They will want things to remain steady. And the argument against that is obviously you don't want things to remain steady because the cost of living is going up, and has been going up steadily for quite a while now. So obviously you do want to change that comes down, but it does appeal to that fear. You want to be left alone, because if you are left alone, you can make things better. We have that instinct.
Has my camera just started flickering? It stopped again.
It did do that, yeah. I don't know why.
No, I don't either.
Have you got the fluorescent bulb? Because sometimes they kind of match up.
No, they're like
LEDs.
Yeah, LEDs.
Yeah. So I think that's possibly a big part of where that comes from, is that kind of the protective fear, because people are unable to afford more and more to live comfortably. Just a thought. Just putting those two dots to just connected those dots. There was a big silence. There was no change of expression. And I was like, have I said that wrong?
No, sorry. I was still on light bulbs. I was still on light bulbs going, my brain just wasn't on the questions.
Yeah.
But I was also, it's kind of like, I've also not quite connected the two things together, because they are somehow connected, and I haven't really grappled down that connection to the base level. I don't know. It's still, and it's, I'm fully aware that we've been talking for a long time, and we are going to have to.
How long are the podcasts? They're like 40 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We should probably wrap up then.
We probably should. But I do want to leave people with something, with a thought or something on this, because whenever we talk about these things in depth, it's us examining our own personal thought processes and beliefs and everything else. So it's great to hear that kind of thing, because it just makes you think about yourself. So,
well, I think, the note that we should probably leave people on then is a similar kind of thing. A lot of politicians appeal to people as animals, which is why I'm so disappointed in the lack of propaganda, which should appeal to us as humans. And it's because when we're threatened, we turn into animals. It's a recorded fact. So I think the challenge that we leave for our audience isn't to think in one particular way or another. It's not to vote for a particular party. It's to sit down and say, I'm a human being. I have the incredible privilege and responsibility of being aware of my place in the universe and being surrounded by other people who are also aware of their place in the universe. We have a responsibility to make the world better, not just for ourselves, but for everyone else in it. And in order to do that, we need to let go of personal fear and ask ourselves, if I look after the people in my life, and if they look after me, what can we do as people to make the world better for everyone else going forwards in a way that isn't about not moving? Because I got to say, listeners, historically speaking, any society that refused to change with the times died. Like that. I can't even list them. There's too many. You have to move with the times. You have to change. And sometimes that means being afraid. But I think if you're aware of your fear, then it allows you that freedom to move past it.
I agree. There was something came up for me while you were talking, and it's gone.
Go on. It's
gone. It's flitted away.
Yeah,
And I made the connection between what I started off saying and it is that it does go down to that. The more towards the right you go, and I hope that's the right on the screen, I don't know, the more towards the right you go, the more fear-based it is, the more about your personal situation, you individually, it is. And I think that's why I hear the more right-wing politicians, and talking in Australia here, and it's all me, 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 me. And I think that I find jarring.
Yes. Politics should be about everyone.
Well, that's the whole point, isn't it? That was how the Greek system came about. This is about looking after everybody. Okay, you had to be male, you had to be over a certain age, and you had to own a certain amount of land. But
you couldn't be a redhead, and you couldn't be a dwarf, and you had to be a citizen, and you had to own land, and you had to be over 25. Yes, but other than that,
and you had to be male. You had to be male. The Romans took it a little bit further, but
we've been getting better.
But it's supposed to be about taking care of the community.
Yes, you're right. Right-wing politics, I think, does tend to ask us to think of ourselves as individuals. What can you do to protect yourself? As opposed to saying, how can we protect each other? Which, does involve putting that fear to one side. Because if you're trusting other people to look after you, then you do need to trust them. You need to trust in complete strangers, which, we do. If someone else makes the roads that we use, someone else pays for the schools that are built, someone else pays more taxes than us, almost certainly, unless you're probably Gina Reinhardt, who's the richest person in Australia. Everyone else pays less taxes than she does. So she's contributing the most, if you think about it that way. Maybe not morally. I have my own issues, but, other than that. But that's what it's about. The Conservative is about thinking about you. And the politicians, I think, reflect that. They think about them. This is what you can do for you. This is what I can do for me. This is how we are going to be separate. Whereas the more to the left that you go, the more it requires you to think of us as a community, which involves thinking of not just you and your family and your neighbors, but also, the drug addict on your street, the bully in a high school, the group of thugs on their motorbikes who rear up the street at 2 a.m. They are all a part of your community, and you have to love them and care about them as you do for yourself. And that's a tough one.
Yeah, we don't want to do that. I found myself going, yeah, but they're not included.
They're not included. They are included. Everyone's a part of the family. But I remind myself, in order to love someone, you don't have to like them.
Where did you get that from, though?
Yeah, I don't know. That one's an old one. Yeah. But, you don't have to approve of someone in order to love them or care about them.
Care about them more than... But the word love in English is not a good description because it encompasses everything. So it doesn't allow you any permutations on what you're saying. It doesn't allow a context for what you're saying.
You're right. Let's say have compassion.
Yeah, compassion's probably better.
Yeah. Which is required.
I would still like to stick a potato in his exhaust pipe, to be perfectly honest. But
yes.
No.
But all we can do, I think, is be the example we want to see. And if that means caring about people, regardless of how they treat you. Because if everyone did that, the world would be better. And the more people do that, the easier it's going to be for more and more people to do that. That's how I look at it, personally.
And I'm going to close up now, but next time, here's the topic of conversation. Maybe we'll see how we go. I've been reading a book called Beyond Belief, which is about modern Pentecostalism.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything that we've just talked. Yeah. I have a lot to say on that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to offend a lot of people.
Oh, good. That's always fun.
So I'm going to send you that book, and then we'll have a conversation about it in a few weeks.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it is because to me it builds on what we're just saying. Mm-hmm. This is one of those other left field connections that I make. Builds on what we're just saying about the right-wing politicians or right-wing people. And it gets me angry. Oh. And I'm sure there's very nice. I mean, I know some Pentecostalists, very nice people. It's about the leadership. And as you know, everything filters down from the top. So, yeah. So we better finish up there. We have gone over time again.
Yeah, it's good night from me.
And it's good night from him.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks for joining us this week on Menopause, Marriage and Motherhood. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite player, and while you're at it, we'd love you to leave us a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would be amazing too. Be sure to tune in next week for the next episode, and remember, if you're busy thinking about what you can't have, how on earth are you going to enjoy what you can have? See you next week.